Alrighty, hello again. Just going to continue reading Journey to the Center of the Earth. This is chapter 31, Preparations for a Voyage of Discovery. The next morning I awoke feeling perfectly well. I thought a bath could do me good, and I went and plunged for a few minutes into the waters of this Mediterranean Sea, for assuredly it deserved this name better than any other sea. I came back to breakfast with a good appetite. Hans was a good caterer for our little household. He had water and fire at his disposal, and so he was able to vary our bill of fare now and then. For dessert, he gave us a few cups of coffee, and never was coffee so delicious. "Now then," said my uncle, "high tide is due now, and we mustn't miss the opportunity to study the phenomenon." "What? The tide?" I exclaimed. "Can the influence of the sun and moon be felt down here?" "Why not? Aren't all bodies subject throughout their mass to the power of universal attraction? This mass of water cannot escape the general law, and in spite of the heavy atmospheric pressure on the surface, you will see it rise like the Atlantic itself." At the same moment, we reached the sand on the shore, and the waves were gradually encroaching on the shore. "The tide is rising!" I exclaimed. "Yes, Axel, and judging by these ridges of foam, you may observe that the sea will rise about 12 feet." "That's amazing," I said. "No, it's entirely natural." "You may say so, uncle, but to me it's quite extraordinary, and I can hardly believe my eyes. Who would ever have imagined, under this terrestrial crust, an ocean with ebbing and flowing tides, with winds and storms?" "Well," replied my uncle, "is there any scientific reason against it?" "No, I can't think of any, as soon as the theory of central heat is abandoned." "So far," he answered, "Sir Humphrey Davy's theory is confirmed." "Clearly it is, and now there's no reason why there should not be seas and continents in the interior of the earth." "No doubt," said my uncle, "but uninhabited ones." "All right," I said, "but why shouldn't these waters hold fish of unknown species?" "Well," he replied, "we haven't seen any yet." "Well, let's make some fishing lines, and see if the bait will draw them to it as it does in regions under the moon." "We'll certainly try, Axel, for we must investigate all the secrets of these newly discovered regions." "But where are we, uncle? I haven't asked you that question yet, and your instruments must be able to provide the answer." "Horizontally, 350 leagues from Iceland." "As much as that?" "I'm confident of not being a mile out in my reckoning." "And does the compass still show southeast?" "Yes, with a westerly deviation of 19 degrees 45 minutes, just as above ground. As for its dip, a curious fact is coming to light, which I have observed carefully, that the needle, instead of dipping toward the pole, as in the northern hemisphere, on the contrary, rises from it." "Would you then conclude," I said, "that the magnetic pole is somewhere between the surface of the globe and the point where we are?" "Exactly. And it's likely enough that if we were to reach the spot beneath the polar regions, about that 71st degree where Sir James Ross has discovered the magnetic pole to be situated, we should see the needle point straight up. Therefore, that mysterious center of attraction is at no great depth." "It must be so, and there's a fact which science has scarcely suspected." "Science, my lad, has been constructed on many errors, but they are errors which it was good to fall into because they led to the truth." "What depth have we reached now?" "We are 35 leagues below the surface." "So," I said, examining the map, "the highlands of Scotland are over our heads, and the Grampians are rising their rugged summits above us." "Yes," answered the professor, laughing. "It's a rather heavy weight to bear, but a solid arch spans over our heads. The great architect has built it with the best materials, and never could man have made an arch so wide. What are the finest arches of bridges and the arcades of cathedrals compared with this far-reaching vault with a radius of 3 leagues, beneath which a wide and tempest-tossed ocean may flow at its ease?" "Oh, I'm not afraid it'll fall on my head or anything like that. But now what are your plans? Are you not thinking of returning to the surface now?" "Return? Certainly not. We'll continue our journey, since everything has gone well so far." "But how are we to get down below this liquid surface?" "Oh, I'm not going to dive in head first. But if all oceans are properly speaking just lakes, being surrounded by land, this internal sea will, of course, be surrounded by a coast of granite, and on the opposite shores we shall find fresh passages opening. How long do you suppose this sea to be? 30 or 40 leagues, so we've no time to lose, and we'll set sail tomorrow. I looked about for a ship. Set sail, will we? I'd like to see my boat first. It won't be a boat at all, but a good, well-made raft. Why, I said, a raft would be just as hard to make as a boat, and I don't see. I know you don't see, but you might hear if you would listen. Don't you hear a hammer at work? Hans is already busy at it. What, has he already felled the trees? Oh, the trees were down already. Come with me and you'll see for yourself. After half an hour's walk, on the other side of the promontory which formed the little natural harbor, I saw Hans at work. With a few more steps I was at his side. To my great surprise, a half-finished raft was already lying on the sand, made of a particular kind of wood, and a great number of planks, both straight and bent, and of frames were covering the ground, enough almost for a little fleet. What sort of wood is this, uncle? It's fir, pine, and birch, and other northern conifers, mineralized by the action of the sea. It's called Sutabrandr, a variety of brown coal or lignite, found mainly in Iceland. But surely then, like other fossil wood, it must be as hard as stone and won't float. Sometimes that may happen. Some of these woods become true anthracites, but others, such as this, have only gone through the first stage of fossilization. Just watch, added my uncle, throwing one of the precious planks into the sea. The bit of wood, after disappearing, returned to the surface and swung to and fro with the movement of the waves. Are you convinced? Said my uncle. I'm absolutely convinced, although it's incredible. By the following evening, thanks to the hard work and skill of our guide, the raft was completed. It was 10 feet by 5. The planks of Suterbander, tied firmly together with ropes, formed a flat surface, and when launched, this improvised vessel floated easily on the waves of the Lidenbrock Sea. Chapter 32. Wonders of the Deep. On the 13th of August, we awoke early. We were now going to adopt the speedier and less tiring mode of traveling. A mast was made of 2 poles spliced together. A cross-piece was made of a third pole. A blanket, borrowed from our coverings, made a tolerable sail. There was no lack of rope for the rigging, and everything was well made and firmly fixed together. The provisions, the baggage, the instruments, the guns, and a good quantity of fresh water from around the rocks around us, all found their proper places on board, and at 6 o'clock the professor gave the signal to embark. Hans had fixed up a rudder to steer his vessel. He took the tiller, I cast off. The sail was set, and we pushed off. At the moment of leaving the harbor, my uncle, who was obsessively fond of naming his new discoveries, wanted to give it a name, and proposed mine amongst others. But I have a better name to suggest, I said. Graben. Let it be called Port Graben. That'll look good on the map. Port Graben it is, then. And so the cherished memory of my Verlin girl became associated with our adventurous expedition. The wind was blowing from the northwest. We sailed with it at top speed. The dense atmosphere acted with great force and drove us along quickly like a huge fan. An hour later, my uncle had been able to estimate our speed fairly accurately. At this rate, he said, we'll cover 30 leagues in 24 hours, and will soon come in sight of the opposite shore. I said nothing, but went and sat forward. The northern shore was already beginning to dip under the horizon. The eastern and western shores spread out wide, as if to bid us farewell. Before our eyes lay far and wide a vast sea. Shadows of great clouds swept heavily over its silver-gray surface. The glistening bluish rays of electric light, here and there reflected by the dancing drops of spray, shot out little sheaves of light from the track we left behind us. Soon we entirely lost sight of land. There was no object left for the eye to judge by, and but for the frothy track of the raft I might have thought we were standing still. About 12 immense tracts of seaweed came in sight. I was aware of the great vegetative power that characterizes these plants, which grow at a depth of 12,000 feet, reproduce under a pressure of 400 atmospheres, and sometimes form barriers strong enough to impede the course of a ship. But never, I think, were there such seaweeds as though we saw floating in immense waving lines on the Lidenbrock Sea. Our raft skirted the whole length of these seaweeds, 3 or 4 thousand feet long, undulating like vast serpents farther than the eye could see. I amused myself, tracing these endless waves, always thinking I would come to the end of them. But for hour after hour my patient expectation proved wrong, and my suspense increased. What natural force could have produced such plants, and what must have been the appearance of the earth in the first ages of its formation, when, under the action of heat and moisture, the vegetable kingdom alone was developing on its surface? Evening came, and, as on the previous day, I perceived no change in the luminous condition of the air. It was a constant phenomenon, the permanence of which we could rely on. After supper, I lay down at the foot of the mast, and fell asleep in the midst of weird reveries. Hans, motionless at the helm, let the raft run on, which, after all, needed no steering; the wind was blowing directly from behind us. Since our departure from Port Graben, Professor Lidenbrock had entrusted the log to my care. I was to record every observation, make entries of interesting phenomena, the direction of the wind, the rate of sailing, the progress we made; in short, every particular of our strange voyage. I shall therefore reproduce here these daily notes, written, so to speak, as the course of events directed, in order to furnish an exact narrative of our passage. Friday, August 14th. Wind steady, northwest. The raft making rapid progress in a direct line, coast 30 leagues to leeward. Nothing in sight before us. Intensity of light the same. Weather fine, that is to say, the clouds are high, light, and bathed in a white atmosphere, resembling molten silver. Thermometer 32 degrees. At noon Hans prepared a hook at the end of a line. He baited it with a small piece of meat, and flung it into the sea. For 2 hours he caught nothing. Are these waters, then, empty of inhabitants? No. There's a pull at the line. Hans draws it in, and brings out a struggling fish. "A fish!" exclaims my uncle. "A sturgeon!" I exclaim in turn. "A small sturgeon." The professor studies the creature attentively, and his opinion differs from mine. The head of this fish is flat, but rounded in the front, and the anterior part of its body is plated with bony, angular scales. It has no teeth, its pectoral fins are large, and it is tailless. The animal belongs to the same order as the sturgeon, but differs from that fish in many essential particulars. After a short observation, my uncle states his opinion. This fish belongs to an extinct family, of which only fossil traces are found in the Devonian formations. What? I cried. Have we taken alive an inhabitant of the seas of primitive ages? Yes, says the professor, continuing his observations. And you will observe that these fossil fishes have no identity with any living species. To have in one's possession a living specimen is a happy event for a naturalist. But to what family does it belong? It is of the order of ganoids, of the family Cephalopsidae. Genus, well, it's a species of pterychus, I'm sure, but this one shows it particularly confined to fishes that inhabit subterranean waters. It's blind. Blind. Not only blind, but actually has no eyes at all. I took a look at it. Yes, my uncle was absolutely right, but thinking that it might be a solitary case, we baited our line again and tossed it out. This ocean is clearly well stocked with fish, for in another couple of hours we catch a large quantity of the pterychides, as well as other fish belonging to the extinct family of diphtherids, but of which species my uncle could not say. None had organs of sight. This unexpected catch makes a useful addition to stock our provisions. It thus becomes clear that the sea contains nothing but species known to us in their fossil state. In the fossil records, fish as well as reptiles are the more perfectly formed the farther back their time of creation. Perhaps we may yet meet with some of those saurians which science has reconstructed out of a bit of bone or cartilage. I pick up the telescope and scan the whole horizon. The sea is deserted everywhere. No doubt we are still too close to the shore. I gaze up into the air. Why should some of the strange birds reconstructed by the immortal Cuvier not flap their wings again in this dense and heavy atmosphere? There are sufficient fish to support them. I survey the whole space that stretches overhead. It is as deserted as the shore was. Nevertheless, my imagination carries me away amongst the wonderful speculations of paleontology. Though awake, I fall into a dream. I imagine I can see floating on the surface of the waters enormous colonia, antediluvian tortoises resembling floating islands. Over the dimly lit strand there tread the huge mammals of the earliest ages of the world. The Leptopterum, found in the caverns of Brazil, and the Mericotherum, found in the ice-clad Siberia. Farther on, the elephant-like Lophidiodon, a gigantic tapir, hides behind the rocks to dispute its prey with Anoptherium, a strange creature which looks like a mixture of a horse, rhinoceros, camel, and hippopotamus, as if the Creator, in too much of a hurry in the earliest hours of the world, had combined several animals into one. A colossal mastodon twists and untwists his trunk, and with his huge tusks pounds and crushes the fragments of rock that cover the shore, whilst a megatherium, buttressed on its enormous paws, grubs in the soil, awakening the sonorous echoes of the granite rocks with his tremendous roarings. Higher up, Protothipithorus, the first monkey to appear on the globe, is climbing in the steep slopes. Higher still, a pterodactyl darts to and fro in irregular zigzags in the heavy air. In the uppermost regions of the air, immense birds, more powerful than the cassowary and larger than the ostrich, spread their vast wings and strike their heads against the granite vault that bounds the sky. All this fossil world rises to life again in my vivid imagination. I return to the scriptural periods or ages of the world, conventionally called days, long before the appearance of man, when the unfinished world was as yet unfitted for his support. Then my dream goes back even farther into the ages before the creation of living beings. The mammals disappear, then the birds vanish, then the reptiles of the secondary period, and finally the fish, the crustaceans, mollusks, and articulated creatures. Then the zoophytes of the transition period also return to nothing. I am the only living thing in the world. All life is concentrated in my beating heart alone. There are no longer any seasons nor any climates. The heat of the globe continually increases and neutralizes that of the sun. Plant growth becomes accelerated. I glide like a shade amongst arborescent ferns, treading with unsteady feet the colored marls and the party-colored clays. I lean for support against the trunks of immense conifers. I lie in the shade of Spinophylla, Asterophylla, and Lycopods 100 feet high. Ages seem no more than days. I pass willy-nilly back through the long series of terrestrial changes. Plants disappear, granite rocks soften, intense heat converts solid rocks into thick fluids, the waters again cover the face of the earth. They boil, they rise in whirling eddies of steam. Mists wrap round the shifting forms of the earth, which, by the imperceptible degrees, dissolves into a gaseous mass, flowing fiery red and white, as large and as shining as the sun. I myself am floating in the middle of this nebulous mass, 1,400,000 times the volume of the earth into which it will one day be condensed, and am being carried forward amongst the planetary bodies. My body has split into its constituent atoms, rarefied, volatilized, sublimated into vapor. I mingle and am lost in the endless clouds of those vast globular volumes of vaporous mists which roll in their flaming orbits through infinite space. But is it not a dream? Where is it taking me? My feverish hand is vainly attempting to describe on paper its strange and wonderful details. I have forgotten everything that surrounds me. The professor, the guide, the raft, all are gone from my mind. A hallucination has taken hold of me. "What's the matter?" my uncle breaks in. My staring eyes fix vacantly on him. "Take care, Axel, or you'll fall overboard." At that moment I feel Hans' sinewy hand seizing me firmly. But for him, carried away by my dream, I would have thrown myself into the sea. "Is he mad?" shouts the professor. "What's going on?" I say at last, coming to myself again.
"Do you feel ill?"
asks my uncle. "No, but I've had a strange hallucination." It's gone now. Is everything all right on the raft? Yes. It's a fair wind and a fine sea. We're sailing along rapidly, and, if I'm not out in my reckoning, we'll strike land soon. At these words, I stood up and gazed round at the horizon, still bounded everywhere by clouds alone. Chapter 33. A Battle of Monsters. Saturday, August 15. The sea unbroken all around, no land in sight, the horizon seems extremely distant. My head is still stupefied by the vivid reality of my dream. My uncle has had no dreams, but he's in a bad mood. He scans the horizon all around with his telescope and folds his arms with a disgruntled look. I notice that Professor Lidenbrock is tending to relapse into his impatient moods, and I make a note of it in my log. It took all the danger I was in and all my sufferings to coax a spark of human feeling out of him. But now that I'm well again, his basic nature has resumed its control over him. And yet, what reason is there to be angry? Is the voyage not prospering as favorably as possible under the circumstances? Is the raft not scudding along marvelously? You seem anxious, uncle, I said, seeing him continually with his telescope at his eye. Anxious? No, not at all. Impatient, then? One might well be with less justification than now. Growing very fast. So what? I'm not complaining that our speed is slow, but that the sea is so wide. I then remember that the professor, before starting out, had estimated the length of this underground sea at 30 leagues. Now we have covered 3 times that distance, but the southern coast is still not in sight. We aren't going down as we thought to be, says the professor. We're wasting time. And the fact is, I haven't come all this way to take a little sail on a pond on a raft. He calls the sea a pond, but our long voyage is taking a little sail. But, I remark, since we followed the path that Signusum has shown us, that's the very question. Have we followed that path? Did Signusum reach this stretch of water? Did he cross it? Has the stream that we followed not completely led us astray? At any rate, we can't feel sorry to have come so far. This view is magnificent, but I don't care for views. I came with a purpose, and I mean to achieve it. So don't talk to me about views and prospects. I take this as my answer, and I leave the professor to bite his lips with impatience. At 6 in the evening, Hans asks for his wages, and 3 rix dollars are counted out to him. Sunday, August 16th. Nothing new. Weather unchanged. The wind is freshening. On awakening, my first thought is to observe the intensity of the light. I'm gripped by a fear that the electric light might grow dim or fail altogether, but there seems no reason to be afraid of that. The shadow of the raft is clearly outlined on the surface of the waves. Truly, this sea is of immeasurable length. It must be as wide as the Mediterranean, or even the Atlantic, and why not? My uncle takes soundings several times. He ties the heaviest of our pickaxes to a long rope which he lets down 200 fathoms. No bottom yet, and we have some difficulty in hauling up our sounding line. But when the pickaxe is brought on board again, Hans points out deep prints on its surface, as if it has been violently compressed between 2 hard bodies. I look at the hunter. Dander, he says. I don't understand, and turn to my uncle, who is entirely absorbed in his calculations. I prefer not to disturb him. I turn my back to the Icelander. He conveys this idea to me, but with a snapping motion of his jaws. Teeth! I cry, looking at the iron bar with more attention. Yes, indeed, those are the marks of teeth imprinted on the metal. The jaws they line must be possessed of an amazing strength. Is there some monster beneath us, belonging to the extinct races, more voracious than the shark, more fearful in its size than the whale? I can't take my eyes off this indented iron bar. Will the dream I had last night come true? These thoughts bother me all day, and my imagination is scarcely calmer after several hours of sleep. Monday, August 17. I am trying to recall the particular instincts of the monsters of the pre-Adamite world, who, coming next in succession after the mollusks, the crustaceans, and the fish, preceded the mammals on earth. The world then belonged to the reptiles. Those monsters held mastery in the seas of the secondary period. They had a perfect structure, gigantic proportions, prodigious strength. The saurians of our day, the alligators and the crocodiles, are only feeble reproductions of their forefathers of primitive ages. I shudder as I recall these monsters to my mind. No human eye has ever beheld them living. They burdened this earth 1,000 centuries before man appeared, but their fossil remains, found in the glacious limestone which the earth called the lias, have enabled their colossal structure to be perfectly reconstructed and anatomically ascertained. I saw the skeleton of one of these creatures at the Hamburg Museum, 30 feet in length. Am I then fated, I, an inhabitant of the earth, to be placed face to face with these representatives of long extinct families? No, surely it cannot be. Yet the deep marks on the iron pick have been made by conical teeth that certainly resemble those of a crocodile. My eyes are fixed in terror on the sea. I dread to see one of these monsters darting forth from its undersea caverns. I suppose Professor Lidenbrock was of my opinion too, and even shares my fears, for after having examined the pickaxe, he too cast his eyes back and forth across the ocean. What a very bad idea that was of his, I thought to myself, to take depth soundings. He's disturbed some monstrous beast in its den, and now we could be attacked during our voyage. I look at our guns and see that they are all right. My uncle notices and nods his approval. Already, widely disturbed regions on the surface of the water indicate some commotion below. The danger is approaching. We must be on the lookout. Tuesday, August 18th. Evening comes, or rather the time comes when sleep weighs down weary eyelids, for there is no night here, and the ceaseless light wearies the eyes with its persistence, just as if we were sailing under an Arctic sun. Hans is at the helm. During his watch, I sleep. 2 hours afterwards, a terrible shock awakes me. The raft is heaved up on a watery mountain and pitched down again, at a distance of 20 fathoms. "What's the matter?" shouts my uncle. "Have we struck land?" Hans pointed a dark mass 600 yards away, rising and falling alternately with heavy plunges. I look at it and exclaim, "It's an enormous porpoise." "Yes," replies my uncle, "and there's an enormous sea lizard, too." And farther over, a monstrous crocodile. "Look at its huge jaws and rows of teeth. It's diving down." "There's a whale, a whale!" cries the professor. "I can see its massive fins. See how it's throwing out air and water through its blowholes." And in fact, 2 columns of liquid are rising to a considerable height above the sea. We stand amazed, thunderstruck, at the presence of such a herd of marine monsters. They are of supernatural dimensions. The smallest of them could crunch up our raft, crew and all, with one snap of its huge jaws. Hans wants to tack to get away from this dangerous area, but in the other direction he sees enemies no less terrible. A tortoise 40 feet long and 30-foot serpent, lifting its fearsome head and gleaming eyes above the surface of the ocean. Flight is out of the question now. The reptiles rise up. They wheel around our little raft faster than express train. They swim around us in gradually narrowing circles. I pick up my rifle, but what could a bullet do against the scaly armor these enormous beasts are clad in? We just stand there, struck dumb with fear. They come closer. On one side to the crocodile, on the other the serpent. The other sea monsters have disappeared. I prepare to fire. Hans signals me not to. The 2 monsters pass within 150 yards of the raft, and hurl themselves one upon the other, with a fury which prevents them from noticing us. The battle is fought 300 yards away from us. We can clearly see the 2 monsters engaged in deadly conflict. But it now seems to me that the other animals are taking part in the fray. The porpoise, the whale, the lizard, the tortoise, at every moment I seem to see one or other of them. I point them out to the Icelander. He shakes his head. "Bah," he says. "What, 2? Does he mean there are only 2 animals?" "He's right," says my uncle, whose telescope has never left his eye. "Surely he must be mistaken," I exclaim. "No. The first of those monsters has a porpoise's snout, a lizard's head, and a crocodile's teeth, hence our mistake. It's an ichthyosaurus, the most terrible of the ancient monsters of the deep." "And the other?" "The other is a plesiosaurus, a serpent protected by a shell of a turtle. It's the mortal enemy of the other." Hans was quite right. Only 2 monsters are disturbing the surface of the ocean, and in front of my eyes are 2 reptiles of the primitive world. I can see the eye of the ichthyosaurus glowing like a red-hot coal and as large as a man's head. Nature has endowed it with optical apparatus of extreme power and capable of resisting the pleasure of the great volume of water in the depths it inhabits. It has been appropriately called the Sarian Whale, for it is both the speed and rapid movements of this monster of our own time. This one is not less than 100 feet long, and I can judge its size when it sweeps the vertical coils of its tail over the water. Its jaws are enormous, and according to naturalists, it is armed with no less than 182 teeth. The plesiosaurus, a serpent with a cylindrical body and short tail, has 4 flippers or paddles that act like oars. Its body is entirely covered with a thick shell, and its neck, as flexible as a swan's, rises 30 feet above the waves. Those huge creatures attack each other with indescribable fury. Around them they create liquid mountains which roll as far as our craft and rocket dangerously. 20 times we come near to capsizing. We can hear incredibly loud hissing. The two beasts are locked together. I can't distinguish the one from the other. The winner's probable rage terrifies us. 1 hour, 2 hours pass. The struggle continues with unabated ferocity. The combatants alternately approach our raft and swim away again. We remain motionless, ready to fire. Suddenly, the ichthyosaurus and plesiosaurus disappear below the waves, leaving a whirlpool eddying in the water. Several minutes pass while the fight continues underwater. Suddenly, an enormous head rises up out of the water, the head of the plesiosaurus. The monster is mortally wounded. I can no longer see its scaly armor. Only its neck shoots up, drops again, coils and uncoils, droops, lashes the waters like a gigantic whip, and writhes like a worm when you cut it in two. The water is splashed about over a long distance and blinds us. But soon the reptile's agony draws to an end. Its movements become weaker. Its contortions become less violent, and the long, serpentine form lies like a lifeless log on the water, now calm once more. As for the ichthyosaurus, has it returned to its undersea cavern, or will it reappear on the surface of the sea? That's going to do it for us today. Up next is Chapter 34, The Great Geyser, and I hope to see you then. All right, goodbye.